A millionaire rescued a homeless girl and let her into his restaurant. When he suddenly turned around, a sound rang out that shocked the man. Laura walked slowly through the dim city streets, her small frame nearly hidden by the sprawling shadows around her. The evening air bit at her through her thin clothes, but she barely felt it. Her mind was locked on one thing: finding something, anything, to eat. Her mom, Jennifer, was lying weak in a hospital bed, unable to work, leaving Laura with the weight of their survival on her small shoulders. She approached strangers hesitantly, her voice soft and shaky as she asked for help. "Please, just a bit of food. My mum's sick." But her pleas went unheard. People hurried past, barely glancing at her, as if she didn't exist. A few gave her a look of pity mixed with unease before turning away, too wrapped up in their own lives to pause for a child in need. Laura's legs felt like lead, each step growing harder. The city around her was vibrant and alive, yet seemed indifferent, mocking her despair with its bright lights and busy streets. But she pushed forward, her determination the only thing holding her up. That resolve, however, was weakening. As night deepened, the city sounds faded, leaving her in a quieter, almost haunting silence. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, each breath shallow and labored. Her strength finally gave way, and she collapsed on the cold stone steps outside an upscale restaurant. Rhythm. There she lay, her small form curled up, the warm light from the restaurant's windows spilling over her in stark contrast to the cold shadows she'd walked through. Inside, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses continued, oblivious to the child just outside. The door creaked open, and Bobby, finishing his shift, stepped out. He was a quiet man, practical and focused in his work, but with a kind heart. Nearly stumbling over her, he froze at the sight. "Hey! Hey, little one," he called, his voice calm yet warm, crouching down to her level. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, uncertain if she was even aware. Laura stirred, her eyes fluttering open, just enough to make out a hazy figure leaning over her. Hope and fear churned inside her, but her strength was drained, leaving her unable to speak or move. "What happened to you?" he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. Her lips moved slightly, but no words emerged. Bobby's heart tightened as he took in her face, smeared with dirt and tears. She was just a young girl, barely more than a shadow of herself, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in ages. Without a second thought, Bobby lifted her gently, cradling her frail form against his chest. She felt as light as a feather, like a bird with a broken wing. "It's all right, I've got you," he murmured, mostly to reassure himself. He could feel the faint warmth of her breath on his neck. It was weak, but it was there. She was alive, and for him, that was all that mattered. He carried her into the warmth of the restaurant, where the sounds of conversation and clinking dishes filled the air, but Bobby was oblivious to the customers around him. He went straight to the quiet staff area at the back, where the noise gradually softened. In a small, cozy room, he gently laid Laura on a cot and tucked a blanket around her. Moving with focused care, he fetched a bowl of soup and a glass of water. When he returned, she was still trembling, her eyes closed, but her breathing was steadier. "Here," Bobby said softly, lifting a spoon to her lips. "Just a little, okay?" She barely opened her mouth, taking tiny sips of broth, too exhausted to resist. Bobby continued feeding her with quiet patience, each spoonful gradually bringing a hint of color back to her face. As sleep overtook her, Bobby kept watch, his mind heavy with thoughts. He didn't know where she had come from or what had led her here, but he was certain of one thing. He couldn't let her go back to the unforgiving streets, not tonight. Once he was sure she was resting peacefully, he got up and slipped out of the room. She slept soundly, safe from the harsh world outside. The warm glow of the room brought a sense of calm, in stark contrast to the usual chaos. As the early morning light began to filter through the curtains, Bobby entered the staff quarters of the Rhythm restaurant, his footsteps light. He had barely slept, his mind racing with worry for the fragile girl he had found the night before, lying alone on the cold sidewalk. He walked toward the small bed where she rested, planning to check in on her and maybe bring her some breakfast. As he got closer, he heard it, a soft, lilting voice, just above a whisper, but clear and unwavering. Bobby halted, listening intently. The melody was unfamiliar, a tender lullaby that seemed to drift through the air like a fragile thread. Moving cautiously to avoid disturbing her, he leaned around the side of the bed. Laura was awake, her eyes still shut, singing quietly to herself. The song had an ancient, almost haunting tone, something that felt like it belonged to another time. Her voice, though soft, was pure and steady, carrying a depth of feeling that seemed beyond her young age. Bobby stood transfixed, watching as the little girl sang to herself in the dim light. The room was small and plain, furnished simply with practical items, yet in that moment it felt almost sacred, as though the world outside had vanished, leaving just the girl and her song. Bobby felt an odd tightness in his chest, a mixture of sorrow and something else, something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, listening. As the song gently came to an end, Laura opened her eyes, blinking in the soft light. It was then she noticed Bobby standing nearby. She froze, her small frame stiffening, as if unsure of his reaction. Bobby offered a gentle smile, though he wasn't sure if it reached his eyes. "That was a beautiful song," he said softly, careful not to alarm her. Laura glanced down, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. "My mum used to sing it to me," she murmured, barely audible. Bobby nodded, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "You have a real gift," he said, his voice sincere. "A voice like that. It's something special." She looked up at him then, her eyes wide, filled with a fragile mix of fear and hope. "Do you think so?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. Bobby nodded, more firmly this time. "I do, and I was thinking, maybe if you'd like you could sing here at the restaurant. We have live music sometimes, and I think the customers would love to hear you." Laura fixed her gaze on him, her face blank and hard to read. "Are you saying this is for money?" Bobby paused, then gave a slow shake of his head. "Not quite like that. Think of it as an exchange. Food, a place to sleep, peace of mind. You just sing, and we'll handle everything else." She stayed silent, clearly processing his offer, her expression a mix of hesitation and caution, the kind that comes after a long journey of trust broken too many times. But within her eyes, he noticed a faint glimmer, something unfamiliar, hope, maybe. "I don't know if I'm good enough," she finally murmured, barely audible. Bobby knelt down, meeting her eye to eye, his gaze unwavering but gentle. "You are," he assured her, calm and sure, "and if you give yourself a chance, you might even surprise yourself." She looked at him carefully, searching for a reason to doubt him. But there was something open and genuine in his face, a look that made her want to believe. Slowly, she nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Okay," she whispered. A smile, genuine and unguarded, spread across Bobby's face as he straightened up. "Great," he said, his tone upbeat but easy. "We'll go step by step, no pressure. Just sing when you're ready." She nodded again, her face still uncertain but with a bit of the fear gone. As Bobby left, a quiet satisfaction warmed him. There was something unique about her, beyond just her voice. That night at Rhythm Restaurant, an almost magical calm filled the air. the kind of calm that foreshadows something unforgettable. Soft chatter, mixed with the light strains of background music, lending an elegant touch to the room. Guests sat at their tables, unaware that the evening would soon take an unexpected turn. Backstage, Laura stood with the microphone in her hands, which trembled slightly. The low lights cast elongated shadows, making her feel even smaller in the vastness of the space. Her heart raced, each beat pounding loudly in her ears. She'd sung before, but never like this. Never for an audience of strangers with high expectations. Drawing a deep breath, she recalled Bobby's words from earlier that day. "You're better than you think." His steady gaze had given her the courage she was desperate for. She wasn't fully convinced, but she knew there was no going back now. She needed to do this, not only for herself, but also for her mother, still lying in that hospital bed, waiting for her to come back. As the stage lights softly lit up, it felt like they were pulling her forward. As Laura took her first steps onto the small platform, it appeared as though an invisible force was guiding her feet, almost on their own. The restaurant quieted down, the clatter of silverware and the soft buzz of conversations fading away as everyone's attention turned toward the small figure standing there. She raised the microphone, but her voice momentarily failed her, catching in her throat. For a second she froze, a wave of panic tightening her chest. The space around her seemed to shrink, and the weight of all those eyes on her felt overwhelming. But then she spotted Bobby off to the side, giving her a slight nod, and something within her shifted. She closed her eyes, tuning out everything but the melody in her mind, and began to sing. At first, her voice trembled, each note fragile as it left her lips. But as she continued, a remarkable transformation unfolded. The fear that had held her captive started to loosen its grip, giving way to a newfound strength she hadn't realized was there. Each note grew bolder, each verse more assured. The music filled her, radiating into the room as a sound, both delicate and strong, vulnerable, yet unyielding. Patrons who had initially been curious but indifferent now stopped to listen. Conversations hushed, utensils were set aside, and every gaze was drawn to the small girl with a powerful voice. The melody drifted through the space like a gentle spell, captivating everyone who heard it. Even the waitstaff, used to the usual clamor of the restaurant, paused in their work to listen. In his office, Gerald, a regular customer of the restaurant, sat at his desk, papers scattered around him, but his mind was elsewhere. The moment Laura's voice reached him, something stirred, pulling him from his thoughts. The voice was oddly familiar, though he couldn't place why. It had a certain quality that tugged at something deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. His curiosity piqued, and he moved quietly to the edge of the dining room, lingering in the shadows as he observed the scene. The girl on stage was young, much younger than he'd expected, yet her voice was something truly extraordinary. The power in her voice struck him, not just because of its beauty, but because of the raw, unguarded emotion flowing with each note. As he listened, memories resurfaced, fleeting yet vivid, transporting him to a time when another voice had once captured his heart. Jennifer. Her name echoed in his mind, bringing with it a surge of emotions he had long pushed aside. There was an undeniable link between this young girl's voice and those hidden memories, though he couldn't yet explain why. When Laura's song drew to a close, the final note hung in the air, delicate and haunting, before slipping into silence. Applause filled the restaurant, but Laura seemed almost oblivious to it. She stood still, catching her breath, her eyes scanning the room. In the midst of the applause, Gerald stayed rooted, absorbed in thought. This girl, There was something about her that stirred a part of him he thought he'd lost forever. He needed answers. Who was she? And why did her voice reach him so deeply? Right then, he resolved to find out. There was more to this young performer than met the eye, and he was determined to uncover it. The days began to blend together at the Rhythm restaurant. Every evening, Gerald returned to his spot, seated just out of view from the stage. He listened to Laura sing without the distractions of the bustling diners. Her voice was both pure and layered with an emotional depth that seemed far beyond her years, awakening something within him that he couldn't fully grasp yet. He made it a habit to go there every night, showing up early and staying late because he found Laura's transformation from a timid young woman to a confident performer to be fascinating. The patrons adored her, often stopping to leave compliments or a few bills in the tip jar by the stage. She'd offer a shy smile in return, her eyes bright, with a mix of pride and gratitude. Gerald would wait until the crowd had dispersed before approaching her, offering a warm, gentle smile. At first, their exchanges were brief, a few words of encouragement, questions about her day, and small comments on her performance. But as days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper and more personal. One evening he asked her, "Do you like singing here?" Gerald's voice was soft as he sat across from her at an empty table. The restaurant had quieted, the dimmed lights creating a cozy, intimate vibe. Laura gave a slight nod, her fingers tracing the edge of her dress. "I do. It makes me feel close to my mom. She used to sing to me all the time when I was little." Gerald leaned in, curiosity lighting up his face. "Your mother sings?" A gentle smile formed on Laura's lips. "Yes, she has a beautiful voice. Even when she's exhausted, she'll still sing for me. She says it's the one thing that always lifts her spirit." Gerald felt something stir inside him, a name hovering just out of reach. "What's your mother's name, Laura?" She glanced up, her eyes bright with love. "Jennifer. Her name is Jennifer." The name hit Gerald like a tsunami, leaving him momentarily speechless. Jennifer. It couldn't be. Yet as he gazed into Laura's eyes, a glimmer of recognition sparked, and pieces of his past began to reappear. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Jennifer, she sounds like an incredible mum. I'd love to meet her someday." Laura's face lit up at his words. "She would love to meet you, Mr. Gerald. She always says that singing is like sharing a piece of your soul." Gerald forced a smile, though his mind was racing. Could this Jennifer be the same woman he had loved so intensely, only to lose so unexpectedly? The thought wouldn't leave him alone. He had to know. Later, Gerald sat in his office, lost in thought, far from the spreadsheets and business plans usually demanding his attention. The voice he had heard at the restaurant, so pure, so full of emotion, had stirred something deep within him. It wasn't just Laura's singing that had mesmerized him. It was the uncanny resemblance to a voice he hadn't heard in nearly 20 years. It had been 17 years since Gerald had last seen Jennifer. Back then, he was a young man, filled with dreams, but still tender-hearted. He had met Jennifer during a business trip to Woodstock, a beautiful little town in Vermont. The project had seemed like a brief assignment, a simple investment to support rural communities, but it turned into something that left a lasting mark on his life. Jennifer had once been a beloved local figure, celebrated for a voice that seemed capable of soothing even the deepest of sorrows. She wasn't just attractive. Gerald had fallen in love with her because of the passion in her voice, which sounded like it came straight from her heart. Their time together had been short, but each moment a being night filled with intensity. They would secretly meet beneath the stars, where Jennifer would sing her soul out for him, and he would share his dreams and ambitions. They exchanged stories, shared hopes, and made promises. But the promises Gerald made were ones he couldn't keep. "I'll come back for you," he'd told her one night, his voice brimming with conviction. "Once I finish this project, I'll return, and we'll build a life together." Jennifer had a slight sadness in her eyes, as if she already knew that the winds of reality frequently carry promises made under the stars away. "I'll wait for you," she'd replied softly, though deep down they both knew life had a way of drifting people apart. Gerald's project eventually wrapped up, but he was swept back into the relentless pace of his business life. The letters he'd meant to write were never penned, and the visits he'd promised never happened. Days turned to weeks, then months, and before he knew it, nearly 20 years had passed without a single word between them. Jennifer became a distant memory, a ghost from a past Gerald had buried beneath layers of success and unspoken regret. But now, as he sat in his office, those memories came rushing back with a force that nearly left him breathless. Laura had spoken her mother's name, Jennifer. The name hit him like a jolt of lightning, and pieces of his past began to fall into place. Could it be the same Jennifer? Could Laura be her daughter? His daughter? The realization filled him with both excitement and dread. If it were true, then he hadn't only left Jennifer behind, he had unknowingly left a child behind too. A child who'd grown up without a father, all because he had failed to keep his word. Gerald stood up suddenly, unable to sit any longer. The walls of his office felt stifling, the air too thick to breathe. He needed to know the truth. He needed to see Jennifer, to speak to her, to discover if the girl he'd been listening to these nights was truly the daughter he never knew he had. Feeling a mix of urgency and anxiety, he grabbed his coat and left. The city streets blurred as he hurried to the hospital where Laura had mentioned her mother was receiving care. His heart pounded, a mix of fear and hope propelling him forward. What could he possibly tell her? How could he justify the years he'd been gone and the promises he'd broken? The hospital hallways felt gloomy, with the faint scent of disinfectant lingering. Occasionally, nurses quietly moving across the polished floors broke the stillness with the gentle hum of machines. Gerald took each step slowly, his footsteps echoing down the seemingly endless corridor as he neared Jennifer's room. Though he hadn't been here in years, the place felt uncomfortably familiar, a place frozen in time, stark and impersonal. He stopped at the door, his hand hovering, hesitant. Part of him wanted to leave, to pretend he hadn't made it this far, but he couldn't walk away, not after what Laura had told him. Hearing Jennifer's name had hit him like a lightning strike. He needed to see her, to confirm it was really her. With a deep breath, Gerald finally opened the door. Inside, only a small lamp by the bedside provided light, casting a warm glow over the room. The figure lying in bed looked so fragile, a shadow of the vibrant woman he once knew. But it was undeniably her, Jennifer. The sight of her made his chest tighten, memories of their past flooding back, nearly overwhelming him. Jennifer stirred, her eyes fluttering open. It took her a moment to recognize him, but when she did, she froze, barely breathing. "Gerald," she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. He nodded and took a step closer. "It's me," he replied, his voice soft, almost fragile. They fell into a heavy silence, weighed down by all the things left unsaid, the shared history they'd tried to forget. Gerald lowered himself into the chair next to her bed, his gaze fixed on her. Jennifer studied him, her steady eyes filled with a sadness that cut straight through him. "You found me," she said at last, her voice weak, but layered with both relief and sorrow. "I didn't know it was you," Gerald admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "Not until Laura, your daughter." She told me about you and I couldn't believe it. I had to see for myself." Jennifer's smile was faint, weary, and never quite reached her eyes. "It's been a long time." "Yes, it has," Gerald echoed, his voice thick. "Too long." They fell silent again, the weight of the lost years and unkept promises like a shadow between them. Gerald struggled to speak, but every thought he wanted to share felt painfully inadequate. How could he put into words why he had walked away? How could he help her grasp the reasoning behind his decisions? "I never thought I'd see you again," Jennifer murmured, shattering the silence. Her gaze lingered on the ceiling, as if lost in scenes only she could see. "I thought it was over between us." Gerald winced at her words, feeling the weight of their sorrow. "I thought so too," he admitted. "But here we are." Jennifer turned, studying his face with a look he couldn't quite decipher. "Why now, Gerald, after all these years?" she asked. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe it's fate, maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's something more. Seeing Laura, hearing her sing, it brought back everything I lost. Everything we lost." Jennifer's eyes softened, though sadness still clung to them. "We were young," she said, as if comforting them both. "We made mistakes, but I never blamed you. And I want you to know that." Gerald dropped his gaze, his throat thick with emotion. "I blame myself," he confessed, his voice raw. "For leaving, for not coming back. I should have stayed. I should have fought harder." Jennifer reached out, her hand trembling as it rested over his. "We can't change the past," she said gently. "But we can decide what happens now." Gerald looked up, meeting her steady gaze. He saw the strength in her eyes, the quiet resilience he had always admired. Despite everything, despite the separation and the struggle she had faced alone, she was still the Jennifer he had fallen for. "I want to help," he said, his voice resolute. "You and Laura, I can't erase the past, but I can do my best to make things right." Gerald's home was worlds apart from the cold, sterile hospital hallways Laura had known. The grand entryway, with its gleaming marble floors and sweeping staircase, felt almost too expansive for the small girl standing at its edge. She paused, absorbing the rich wood paneling, the artwork lining the walls, and the soft warmth of the light filling the room. It was stunning, yes, but also intimidating. Nothing like the cramped, noisy streets she was used to. Gerald saw her hesitation and offered a gentle smile. "It's just a house, Laura," he said softly. "A little bigger than most, but still, just a house." Laura nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her mind. She walked beside him as he guided her down the hall and into an inviting living room, where a gentle fire crackled in the fireplace. The cozy warmth of the room started to ease her unease. Even so, Laura couldn't shake the sense that she didn't quite fit into such surroundings. "Your mother will be comfortable here," Gerald reassured her, gesturing toward a large plush couch. "I've arranged the best care. She'll have everything she needs." Laura perched cautiously on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped together in her lap. The idea of her mother being looked after in a place like this was comforting, yet overwhelming. It felt surreal to think this was her life now, after all they'd endured. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. Gerald settled into a chair across from her, observing her intently. He saw the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she sat with a certain tension, as if expecting the ground to give way beneath her. He knew that feeling all too well. He'd spent most of his life shielding himself, hiding his emotions behind work and obligations. But now, with Jennifer and Laura back in his life, those walls were slowly coming down. "You don't have to thank me," Gerald replied. his voice soft but steady. "I'm just trying to make things right." Laura lifted her gaze to him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She saw none. There was something in his expression, warm but guarded, as though he feared getting hurt just as much as she did. "How's your mother doing?" he asked, shifting the conversation to what he knew mattered most to her. "She's better," Laura replied, a faint smile forming on her lips. "The doctor says she's improving, but it's slow." Gerald nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for not being there sooner. "She's strong, like you," he said. "She'll pull through." Laura's smile wavered, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. "I hope so," she whispered, her voice barely steady. Gerald leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We'll make sure of it," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're not alone in this, Laura. We'll face it together." She looked at him again, and this time her expression held something new, a glimmer of hope, fragile, yet growing. She nodded, and for the first time since stepping into the house, she seemed to relax, even if just a little. The days that followed were filled with energy and activity. Jennifer was welcomed into Gerald's home, where he set up a cozy room just for her, outfitted with every comfort he could arrange. Laura, meanwhile, continued to captivate the audience at Rhythm, her performances drawing larger crowds with each passing night. Yet, it was the moments at home that began shifting the dynamics. Bit by bit, Gerald found himself anticipating those calm evenings with Laura, whether they were talking or simply enjoying a companionable silence. Both treaded lightly, not wanting to rush anything, but there was an undeniable connection building between them. It was unexpected, but soon became something they both treasured. One evening, after Laura returned from a show, they found themselves by the fireplace, the flames casting a gentle glow around the room. Laura relaxed into the cushions, her eyes half closed, a peacefulness Gerald had never seen on her face before. "You did great tonight," Gerald said, breaking the silence. Laura opened her eyes and smiled genuinely, her face lighting up. "Thank you," she replied, sounding content. "It felt good." Gerald nodded, feeling a surprising sense of pride. He'd never thought of himself as a fatherly figure, yet with Laura, it just felt right. As the fire softly crackled and the night grew darker, Gerald glanced over at her as she drifted off to sleep, curled up on the sofa. In that quiet moment, he felt a firm resolve settle within him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would be there for her, for both of them, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, Rhythm hummed with low anticipation as patrons filled the tables, their conversations buzzing with excitement for the night's performance. The lights were dimmed, giving the room a warm, intimate feel, while the stage awaited Laura, a single spotlight shining on the microphone. Backstage, Laura paced, her heart racing in time with the hum of the audience beyond the curtains. It was her biggest night so far, a performance that could change her life. But even as she prepared to step out, her mind kept drifting elsewhere. Her mother's health had suddenly declined earlier that day. The doctors hadn't said much, their faces somber as they outlined the complications. Jennifer, despite her frailty, had been insistent. Laura needed to perform. "This is your night," she'd whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "Don't worry about me, I'll be okay." Laura wasn't convinced. The image of her mother, pale and fragile in that hospital bed, was seared into her mind. She wanted nothing more than to stay by her side, to cancel the performance, but Jennifer wouldn't allow it. "You've worked too hard for this," Jennifer had told her. "You have to go." Gerald had been there as well, his calm presence a steady anchor in the storm. He'd promised he would stay with Jennifer, watching over her while Laura performed. "I'll look after her," he'd assured Laura, his voice steady and reassuring. "Focus on your music. It's what she wants." And so, here she was, standing just off stage, the weight of her mother's illness resting heavily on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. The audience waited. Her mother was waiting. She had to do this. For Jennifer, for herself, for all of them. A stagehand signaled that it was time. Laura nodded, gathering her resolve. She stepped into the spotlight, feeling the warmth of the lights as the audience fell silent. Holding the microphone, its cool metal felt grounding in her grip. As she stood there in the oppressive silence, the entire room held its breath. Taking a deep breath, she began to sing. At first, her voice was soft, almost hesitant, testing the waters. But as she continued, something inside her shifted. The fears, the worry, the weight of her mother's condition. They seemed to dissolve, leaving only the music. Her voice grew stronger, fuller, filling the space with a sound that was both powerful and haunting. The audience was captivated, drawn into the world Laura created with each note. She sang with a raw emotion that surpassed her years, every note carrying a piece of her heart. It was as if she was singing not just for herself, but for her mother, for Gerald, and for everyone who had lifted her up on this journey. From backstage, Gerald watched in the shadows, his gaze fixed on the young girl on stage. He could see the battle within her, how she wrestled to contain her emotions, even as she channeled them into her song. He admired her strength and unwavering resilience. Moments like this affirmed his place in her life, not just as a guardian, but as a father figure. As the last note of her song faded into the room, a brief silence fell over the crowd, a collective breath held before applause broke out. The applause was loud and powerful, yet Laura barely registered it. She stood there, heart pounding from more than just the performance. The crowd rose, clapping and cheering, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. She needed to see her mom. With a quick, modest bow, she slipped off the stage, her heart pounding, both from excitement and the ever-present worry. Gerald was waiting for her just off stage, his expression hard to read. "You were incredible," he said, though she barely noticed. "How's my mum?" she asked, voice trembling with worry. Gerald paused for the briefest moment, then nodded with a soft smile. "She's here," he replied. "She insisted on being here. Didn't want to miss a second." Laura's eyes widened with shock. "She's here?" Gerald nodded, gesturing to the far side of the room. There, sitting quietly near the back, was Jennifer. Though she looked pale, her eyes were alight with pride and love. Relief and joy flooded through Laura, almost overwhelming her. She rushed over, throwing her arms around her mom, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You came," she whispered, voice breaking with emotion. Jennifer's smile was faint but full of warmth. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything," she answered softly, her tone filled with love. Gerald's home had transformed from a quiet, echoing space into a haven of warmth and comfort. The once intimidating walls now felt inviting, bathed in the soft glow of evening light filtering through the windows, casting gentle shadows around them. The dining table was set for three, and the clinking of silverware against plates was the only sound as they enjoyed a peaceful meal together. Laura, seated between Gerald and Jennifer, looked around in quiet disbelief. The chaos and uncertainty of recent months now felt far away, replaced by a new, comforting sense of stability. For the first time in what seemed like ages, she didn't worry about where her next meal would come from, or whether her mom would get the care she needed. In that instant, everything felt just as it should. Gerald glanced across the table to Jennifer, who returned his look with a gentle, knowing smile. Since moving into his home, her health had noticeably improved. Her cheeks had gained a touch of color, and her eyes, once weighed down by worry, now held a spark of quiet happiness. Gerald took comfort in that look. It was a silent affirmation that things were moving in the right direction. He placed his fork down and cleared his throat, catching Laura's attention. "There's something I'd like to discuss with both of you," he began, his tone steady, but hinting at the gravity of what he was about to say. Jennifer and Laura shared curious glances, their forks hovering mid-air. Gerald took a deep breath to gather his thoughts. "These last few weeks, they've been tough, but they've also been some of the most meaningful days of my life. Having you both here, watching you grow stronger together, it's made me realize something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want us to be a family," he said finally, his voice soft, yet filled with quiet determination. "A real family, in every sense." Laura's eyes widened, flickering toward her mother, as if seeking confirmation that she'd heard him correctly. Jennifer's face softened, her eyes growing misty as she reached over to rest her hand on Gerald's. "Gerald," she whispered, her voice brimming with gratitude and surprise. He held her gaze, sincerity written on his face. "I want to marry you, Jennifer, and I want to adopt Laura as my daughter. I know it's sudden, but I've thought a lot about this. I've spent so much of my life alone, dedicated to work, and now I understand that none of it matters without people you care about." Laura's heart raced as she absorbed his words, reeling at the prospect of a future she'd never dared to imagine. A life where she belonged, where she was part of a family. Jennifer squeezed Gerald's hand, her eyes shining with unashamed tears. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Yes, Gerald, I want that too." Laura's eyes bounced between them, and as the realization dawned, a radiant smile spread across her face, filling the room with a happiness she once thought was out of reach. "Does this mean you're going to be my dad?" she asked, her voice small but filled with hope. Gerald's smile was warm and genuine, his eyes reflecting a quiet joy. "If you're willing," he said, his voice gentle but steady. Laura's eyes filled with tears, though they were tears of happiness. She couldn't find the words. Her emotions were too overwhelming, so she simply reached out and grasped Gerald's hand, holding on as if to keep this moment from slipping away. The three of them sat there, hands clasped, the importance of the moment settling over them like a comforting embrace. It was a simple but powerful promise, a pledge of stability, love, and the future they could create together. Later that evening, as they relaxed in the living room, Jennifer rested her head on Gerald's shoulder, sighing contently. Laura curled up beside them, her head resting on Jennifer's lap. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room as they spoke in hushed voices about the future, the small wedding they would plan, and the life they were beginning as a family. For Gerald, it was a complete transformation. Once a man consumed by business and empty pursuits, he had now found something truly meaningful, love in its purest form. Jennifer, who had once feared losing everything, now felt peace knowing her daughter was safe, cherished, and loved. And, for Laura, a young girl who had known only hardship, this was a place where she finally felt at home. Days began to blend as the family moved through the ups and downs of life. Jennifer's health was a constant concern, with her strength coming and going like the ocean's tides. Some mornings, she'd rise with a spark in her eyes, moving gracefully around the house, as though her illness was but a distant memory. But other days were harder, when even getting out of bed felt overwhelming. Gerald watched her closely, his worry carefully hidden behind a calm resolve. He had become both caregiver and businessman, dividing his time between the demands of rhythm, his restaurant, and his family's needs. It was a delicate balance, one that left him exhausted each night. Yet he never complained. There was simply too much at stake. Laura, too, felt the weight of their circumstances. Her music career was taking off, with offers from record labels and venues coming in, each one more promising than the last. But each new opportunity brought a new challenge. Could she bear to leave her mother's side? Was it right to chase her dreams while Jennifer was struggling? Yet, with each difficulty, the family grew closer, and Gerald was there for every decision and doubt. He was the unwavering support in their lives, helping Laura navigate through every contract detail and offering calm words when the stress became overwhelming. Jennifer, even at her most vulnerable, encouraged her daughter to pursue her dreams. "You're meant for this," she'd say, her voice faint, but her belief unwavering. "Don't let anything hold you back." As the days went by, Jennifer's condition began to improve. Her doctors expressed cautious hope, and for the first time in months, a glimmer of optimism lit up their lives. Laura, too, found new motivation. Her career was now a shared journey, not just about herself, but a testament to the strength they had all shown through life's challenges. The concert hall was breathtaking, with its ornate ceilings and lush velvet seats echoing a legacy of excellence. The air buzzed with excitement, the audience's quiet conversations creating a soft hum that filled the room. This was Laura's night, the peak of a journey that had tested every ounce of her resilience. Standing backstage, her heart beat in sync with the nervous energy swirling within her. Yet, underneath the nerves, was a fierce resolve. As the lights dimmed, the audience grew silent, and a golden light bathed the stage. Laura took a steadying breath, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She felt the weight of this moment, yet she welcomed it with open arms. This was the culmination of all she had worked toward, all she had envisioned. Tonight was more than a performance. It was her chance to shape the path ahead. In the front row, Jennifer sat beside Gerald, her eyes gleaming with pride and joy. Despite her health, she insisted on being there to witness her daughter's success. Gerald glanced at her, his heart full of quiet satisfaction. They had made it. Against every obstacle, they had reached this point as a family. Laura stepped into the spotlight, its warmth surrounding her like a comforting shield. She looked out into the audience, briefly blinded, but she could just make out the familiar shapes of her mother and Gerald. Their presence steadied her, giving her the courage to set aside any lingering fears and focus on the performance ahead. The first gentle notes of the piano drifted through the room, filling the air with a haunting beauty. Laura shut her eyes, allowing the melody to pull her in, to envelop her as she prepared for her song. When she finally began to sing, her voice rang out pure and powerful, each note infused with an emotional intensity that immediately captured the audience's attention. Her song was a story of resilience, of love, and of the challenges that had molded her. She poured her heart into every line, giving her all to the performance. The young woman's presence on stage had the audience completely engrossed as the song continued. Laura's voice seemed to permeate the entire space, reaching every corner and drawing each listener into her world. This was different from anything she had done before. She had never sung with such conviction, such clarity. It was her moment, and she held onto it, allowing the music to lift her higher and higher. In the front row, Jennifer's eyes shimmered with tears, and she grasped Gerald's hand tightly, moved by her daughter's beautiful voice. Gerald felt pride swell within him, mixed with profound gratitude. Laura wasn't just performing, she was flourishing, revealing the brilliance he had always believed in. As the final note faded into silence, the audience collectively held their breath for a brief second, as if savoring the last echo. Then they burst into applause, the sound like a roaring wave. Laura stood on stage, catching her breath, her heart soaring with a joy she had never experienced. She took a deep bow, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, feeling their appreciation wash over her, and then something she hadn't expected happened. A man in a tailored suit approached from the side of the stage, his face lit with genuine admiration. He was the director of the renowned Elia Academy of Music, one of the most respected institutions in the country. As the applause quieted, he stepped forward and offered his hand to Laura. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice filled with the weight of someone deeply moved by what he had just witnessed. "You have a rare gift, Laura. I would be honored if you'd consider joining our academy. We have a full scholarship ready for you, should you be interested." Laura felt her breath catch as his words sank in. Elia Academy. She'd heard of it, of course. Everyone in the music world knew about it. It was the place where talent was honed and where dreams took flight. What he was offering her was beyond anything she'd ever dared to hope for. She glanced over at her mother and Gerald, her eyes wide with amazement. Jennifer's face glowed with pure, unfiltered joy, while Gerald nodded, pride shining in his eyes. They'd been by her side through every step, and now they were witnessing her biggest moment yet. "It would be an honor," Laura managed to say, her voice filled with emotion. The director smiled warmly, solidifying the moment. "Welcome to Elia, Laura." The audience, having caught their exchange, burst into applause again, filling the hall with celebration. Laura's heart swelled with joy as she looked over the crowd, realizing this was only the beginning. As they stepped into the cool night air outside Gerald's home, a peaceful silence fell over them, each lost in their own thoughts. Yet the sense of unity between them was stronger than ever. They had faced obstacles and come out on top. Now, looking toward the future, they felt a surge of hope and determination. As Laura climbed the stairs to her room, she paused at the top, looking down at Jennifer and Gerald, who stood arm in arm below. "We did it," she whispered to herself, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, we did," Gerald echoed softly, as though he could hear her thoughts. With the click of her door closing, a chapter of their lives came to an end. But a new journey lay ahead, filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable strength of family. And there you have it, the beautiful journey of Laura, where music, family, and kindness wove together to create something extraordinary. If this story moved you, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little reminder of love and compassion's power. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that warm the heart and soul. We've got plenty more stories in store that celebrate the strength of family, the magic of music, and the impact of simple acts of kindness. I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite part of Laura's journey? Drop a comment below, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. Just remember, at the end of the day, it's the love we give and the kindness we spread that really creates the rhythm in our lives. See you in the next video.